Welcome back to the Inside Nebraska Recruiting Blitz podcast. As usual, I'm Tim Verghese, today joined by Rivals National Recruiting Director Adam Gorney. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. Good to be here, man.
Yes, sir. Of course, good to have you. And figured we'd get you on for what's been the biggest recruiting weekend for Nebraska, not just this summer, but this whole calendar year so far. Getting 20 plus guys on campus this weekend, mainly on Saturday alone. For their what they call their elite day. Obviously, the headliners of the weekend were the handful of 2025 prospects that were in town. Obviously, the biggest remaining targets for Nebraska. Headlining the weekend was David Sanders Jr., the five-star offensive tackle from Charlotte. He came in on Friday, and you've seen the videos at this point. Got a warm welcome from the Nebraska fan base. And pretty much spent the day with Dylan Raiola and his family, learned a lot about the program. And this was an important visit for Nebraska, getting him back on campus for the second time. I've stated in the past, I wasn't going to give Nebraska a real shot until they got him on campus a couple times. They've done that now. They've got him on campus twice now. That he's seen more of the city. He has a feel for the program as a whole. And I think now, heading into the final weeks of this recruitment, I think Nebraska's got a real shot here, but again, I think still wary of Tennessee. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think Tennessee and Ohio State. I think both are, very serious contenders here. But Nebraska is doing something that no other team can really do. I mean, the love that he's been shown has been phenomenal. It's super important. But I don't know if it's going to be like the deciding factor for him. So I think David Sanders and his family and his agent and everybody involved in this decision absolutely love coming to Lincoln, getting really the celebrity treatment unlike anywhere else. It's what makes Nebraska football so great. But then he goes to Tennessee, and Ohio State is still very much in the running. And so, he's putting together, he was there. He would spend a lot of time with Dylan Raiola. I'm sorry. And someone close to him told me that, Sanders is absolutely like the priority. Like Dylan is spending a lot of his time, not only on this visit, taking him around personally, but on social media and just kind of being kids, trying to get him in the class. Now, will it be the final determining factor that Nebraska had more fans to greet him than Tennessee did? Probably not. I think one of the factors playing here is that Nebraska does not have one offensive tackle right now in the NFL. And I guarantee you that Tennessee and Ohio State are using that as leverage or will, if needed, to kind of convince Sanders, that Nebraska is nice. There's a lot of excitement there. Matt Rule seems to be building something special, at least back into relevancy. But that to be an NFL offensive tackle, of which David Sanders wants to do, Ohio State or Tennessee would be the spots.
For sure. And I think heading into this final stretch, I think be a little wary, obviously, of the other two programs still involved. And again, I wouldn't get too necessarily optimistic if I was a Nebraska fan just yet. But something I noted yesterday or this morning in my intel piece, and something I wanted to get your thoughts on as well. This isn't a recruitment that I think is necessarily shut down, even though he does commit in August. And I think with these two visits, Nebraska's positioned themselves in a place where, if they have a good season, I think he'd have an eye on Lincoln. Like, I think if they put together some positive results on the field, he sees some from progression in the development of the offensive linemen, especially some of the young, talented guys they have on campus. Seeing the progression from those guys, I think there's a chance Nebraska can put, if it's not Nebraska on August 17th, I think there's a chance Nebraska can at least have his ear, down the line this season.
Yeah, I mean, just recruiting is sort of this thing about 11 months. We just talk about it, and then all in 1 month, basically, everything hits the fan and so much changes. And I think that could be definitely a situation with Sanders, much like it was a situation with Raiola. Like, we were talking about him being committed to Georgia and who's going to flip from Georgia and all those kinds of things. And then it happened. And, and that kind of got the wheels starting to some excitement again. But they did a phenomenal job last recruiting cycle, not only with Raiola, but keeping Carter Nelson in state when Georgia was comparing him to Brock Bowers. It's hard to turn that down. Grant Brix is a kid who could have gone to a lot of places. Iowa certainly has more offensive line tradition than Nebraska over the last decade or two. But he kind of comes into the class. So I do think that, and as crazy as this sounds, and for the Nebraska fans that have been suffering through this, it feels probably much longer. But Nebraska has one winning season since 2014. Like they had that winning season in 2016, but before that, it was a losing season. So, really, it's been a desert of wins in Lincoln. So if Matt Rule can kind of get this thing turned to 7-5, 8-4, and there's a lot of progress there, and the offense looks really good under Raiola. Although I know a quarterback hasn't necessarily been named yet, but I think we all know what's happening. I think that there could be excitement there if Raiola comes back to Sanders in the fall and says, "Hey, man, my line is doing great. We need one final piece." And let's say Michigan beats Ohio State again, and Ryan Day might be on some crazy chopping block, or Tennessee disappoints, or the Tennessee offensive line coach leaves. There's so much unknowns that we could speculate on, but until they happen, like in November, and now with signing day moving up like late November, there's just no knowing what this can do. So you lay the groundwork now, you get them on campus a few times, you show them the love, you get a good NIL package together that is absolutely part of the situation here, and then you play it out through the fall and see where it lies.
Right. And again, like you said, this is just pretty much just laying the groundwork. I think Nebraska's done a good job doing that, where like again, a couple of months ago, they hadn't even offered, much less like were actually involved in this recruitment. So the fact they've gotten to this point anyway where they're going to be a hat at the table and have some staying power to like, potentially make some noise down the stretch of just the cycle overall, I think is a testament to the effort that both Raiola, Dylan, and his uncle Donovan have put into this recruitment so far.
Yeah, and I think the added bonus here is that the quarterback's father is involved, the quarterback's uncle is the staff and the position coach. But if you really look down, like just even the top 5 or top 10 of even the 2024 class, there's just no predicting where things are going to go. Jeremiah Smith signs with Ohio State, been long time commit, but even to the last day, even after he basically signed, but he didn't send in his fax. Raiola was a flip. Ryan Williams up into the last second, Auburn and Texas were involved there. Julian Sayin signed with Alabama, was there for a cup of coffee, and is now at Ohio State already. So like it's crazy. And then a kid like Micah Hudson, signs with Texas Tech because of relationships he has on the staff there, not because they're the best team in the Big 12 or the best offense, but all about relationships. So you lay that groundwork, you see where it goes, you keep Raiola engaged through the fall, and hope it plays out well for you.
For sure. And I think, this more than Sanders, I think we've kind of touched on this all summer, but this doesn't just go for Sanders. This kind of goes for a couple guys across the country. Like Nebraska's got themselves in a spot where, from a relationship standpoint, they're in there. They've done a good job building those relationships and getting certain guys on campus at least once or twice. And, basically a lot of these guys are like, I just want to see Nebraska win. Like that's my only question remaining for them is I want to see results. And like you mentioned, those results start to come. I think you start to see this class can change really quick in terms of just who's at the top of it. And, I think we're just changing the subject real quick. One they're potentially close to getting, who would be the highest ranked commit in the class. Just on the topic of flips, 4-star receiver Isaiah Mozee was back in Nebraska this weekend. Came up on Saturday, made the short drive over from Lee Summit. Obviously, the big news or the big development there is his father is now on Nebraska's staff, and he's taking one of those 10 off-campus recruiter positions. So he's going to be a guy that is allowed to recruit his son, and his son is allowed to be recruited by Nebraska. No issues with the IAWP rule there. But Mozee was back on campus, and it just sources continue to maintain like a flip feels like it is down the line at some point. Oregon and Oregon's kind of holds his commit, but I think something that a lot of people don't realize is the week before he committed to Oregon, he snuck in a visit to Nebraska. And then he
Yeah.
returned for an official visit, obviously in June. And so this has been his third visit since April alone. Like he's been at Nebraska a bunch. I think the opportunity to reunite with his dad. His dad was obviously his high school coach the past 3 seasons. I think the opportunity to reunite with him in a place closer to home. There was when he was at UCF and Isaiah was committed to Oregon. I think there was a second there where it was like, okay, this family is going to be like coast to coast, like
Yeah.
mom's in Missouri, dad's in Orlando, son's in Oregon. Like I don't think that was a tenable long-term situation, and so now you're at a point where I think Nebraska can pull this off, and we're recording this Sunday afternoon. This comes out Monday or Tuesday. Like this could just be done by the time we get off this.
Yeah, it could already be done. But what I think bodes well for Nebraska here is that when his dad was at UCF, there wasn't like serious consideration of a flip to UCF, but there was and still is a very serious consideration about a flip to Nebraska. So in terms of quarterback, it's probably even. I mean, playing with Raiola is going to be very good for any wide receiver. At Oregon, he's going to have Dante Moore in Will Stein's offense. So obviously that's very receiver friendly. Oregon doesn't really produce a ton of NFL wide receivers though. So I think that could be like sort of sold to Nebraska. Look, Nebraska needs playmakers. And I think Matt Rule is certainly smart enough to know that. His coaching staff is smart enough to know that. They need to get players that can make plays on the outside and make that vertical passing game a much bigger threat. And guys like Carter Nelson will be able to do that. I think I read that he's going to start at wide receiver, which is really interesting to see because he's a super athletic kid. It'll be interesting to see how they use him. But a guy like Mozee fits into that. He would be with his dad. I think that would be a big plus. He'd be comfortable, around that situation. He obviously coached him in high school. And it seems like these guys are going to do whatever they want. Like Williams and Warney, went to Missouri. Mozee wasn't going to follow him there. So he committed to Oregon. But yeah, Nebraska is definitely in this. I would not be shocked at all and probably predict that at some point he's going to flip to Nebraska.
For sure. And this is kind of just a wait and see situation. I'm sure people are curious about the other elite wide receiver in town, Michael Terry, but he doesn't get into town until Monday.
Yeah.
By the time you're watching this. So we'll have updates over at Inside Nebraska on his visit. One thing I will pass along there, caught up with some sources there this weekend just to figure out kind of where things are at, because Nebraska kind of got that late visit. It was scheduled to be Oregon and Texas this weekend. He tacked on a Nebraska visit at the end. Something I've kind of heard here is NIL wasn't a deal in this, or wasn't like a big factor in this recruitment for a good bit. And then as this recruitment's kind of headed into decision mode these last few weeks, Terry and his family have realized the market for him is a lot bigger than he thought, which again, as a top 70 prospect, it makes sense that he's very much in demand. But you look at the other schools involved, Texas A&M, Oregon, these are players in the NIL space. These are teams that kind of hold no, they leave nothing on the table. Like they can get into some of these bidding wars, and I think this is what this recruitment's starting to turn into. But at the same time, NIL isn't everything. Nebraska's built good relationships with Terry. They've done a really good job making him priority for as long as anyone. Texas has been probably in this recruitment longer than anybody, but Nebraska's been right there as well, and they've made him a priority pretty much since they offered him. And I think between that, I think his comfort on campus, the role they've pitched to him, Oregon still sees him as this running back wide receiver hybrid type thing. Texas kind of sees him at defense, but Nebraska's been like, you're an offensive wide receiver. You're a playmaker for us. That's the role he wants to play. I think the combination of things could potentially bode well for Nebraska, but I see a hard time if this does get to a bidding war to see Nebraska overcoming Oregon or Texas.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing too. And position is also an interesting thing. If he's like intrigued and Texas continues to, he was talking more with Tashard Choice than anybody on his Texas visit. That's the running backs coach there. So if he's intrigued by this sort of athlete role where they can have him run the ball, have him catch the ball out of the backfield, line him up at receiver, kind of use him all over as an H-back type in some ways, that could be good. If he's intrigued by the opportunity of playing offense or defense, that could be a positive. But if Nebraska, and they've spent a lot of time getting down there and getting to know him as well, and having, staff around him and all that kind of stuff, they think they're in this. So if their pitch is, hey, we're not going to fool around with that stuff, we think you're an elite wide receiver, and he kind of falls in love with that idea and the opportunity to get on the field early and be a playmaker early in an offense with a young quarterback, I think that could be an intriguing thing. If it becomes just a bidding war down the line, you're not going to beat Texas and Oregon. But if it's more than that, then it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
For sure, no doubt. And yeah, and that, like, kind of turning the page again to kind of to 2026, looking at some of these playmakers that were in town. We start off here with the regional guy that I think I caught up with him this weekend after his visit. I think Nebraska's in a really good spot with Keenan Harris out of St. Louis University High. Top ranking, or number 8 linebacker in the country per Rivals, number 104 player in the 2026 class. Had a big offseason, kind of rose up the rankings, picked up some big offers. Outside of Nebraska, you're talking the likes of like Oklahoma, Missouri, Oregon, USC, Ohio State, or some of the other top schools here. But Nebraska's been recruiting him since he was a freshman. He's got a good relationship with Rob Dvorak. I asked him, like, you've come to Nebraska 3-4 times. Why? Like, what keeps you coming back? And he's basically stated, like, the relationships at Nebraska are kind of better than some of the other ones he has at other places. And it's not just Rob Dvorak, the linebackers coach. It's Keith Williams, director of player personnel, who hails from St. Louis. Now you got Jamar Mozee, Isaiah Mosee's father. He's again, like, a former high school head coach in Missouri, has familiarity with a lot of these top prospects out of the state. So that's another name kind of working on Harris, and he's already planning to come back for the Rutgers game in October. So he's already got a return visit set to Nebraska. So I see Nebraska in this recruitment for the long haul.
Yeah, I do too. And it's an interesting list because, as Eli Drinkwitz has done very well at Missouri, especially this past season, beats Ohio State in a bowl game. A St. Louis kid, you think, hey, maybe Missouri is trending here, but I don't get that sense either. He's really kind of blown up this spring. He looked really good at our Rivals camp in the off season. And so Oklahoma's involved there, Missouri, Ohio State, Oregon. Those are some big hitters to beat. But if this comes down to relationships, Nebraska has been involved for the longest. A lot of times when, a couple schools offer early and then sort of bigger name schools offer late, a kid kind of resorts back to the guys that showed him love early on. And so I think that's really, really important to continue those relationships. So if he's second or third on the board at Oklahoma or Ohio State, or, if he wants to stay closer to home, but not be right down the road in Columbia, I think Nebraska has a very good chance here. I think that they've been involved for a long time. His relationships are good there. And it's certainly a good sign that he's already, scheduled a return trip for the fall.
No doubt. And yeah, he's a guy that, the staff, I think, sees linebackers a position they've recruited pretty well. They haven't won some recruitments they probably wanted to, and that could and should come with time. But looking ahead to 26, Harris is a guy that I think is going to emerge as a top linebacker target for them as we kind of turn that page to that next board. Every down back, the staff sees him as that. You talk about, like, what a unique player he is. He kind of plays nickel at the high school level, has primarily experience in the secondary. He's very, very good in coverage, very light on his feet. He's not bad in run defense either for a linebacker, or for a converted DB. That stuff that's kind of come natural to him. And but more than anything, I think his coverage ability at his size is really, really impressive. You're talking 6'2", 220, really rangy arms. And he's got 33-inch arms, which is just an impressive metric for a guy that size. That's rare length.
Yeah.
And that's a guy that can stick in coverage with a slot receiver, with a running back, with bigger tight ends in the Big Ten. That's a guy you put him on the field and you don't really take him off no matter what package you're running.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you see him in person, you're like, yeah, I'm not sure this guy's gonna be able to move, he's kind of on slot receivers and doing that. But through routes, he's right there. He looks good. He moves well. And like you said, he has longer arms and can kind of defend. So if you're looking kind of a thumper, put pads on him, he could thump, or he could kind of play out in space and tackle in space or cover. Yeah, definitely a big time kid.
For sure. Touching on a couple more just regional guys, and then we'll touch on some guys, some bigger names that were in town. Hudson Parliament out of Brandon Valley, South Dakota. I wrote this up too, and I'll say this again here. Hudson's not ranked currently per rivals, but I wouldn't look too hard at that. I think you watch the film and you look at the caliber of programs that are involved in that recruitment right now. This is a guy that's going to end up being one of the top players in the region, I think. Has some two-way ability. Really impressive athleticism for his size. Got a 10-foot broad jump at 6'3", 285 pounds, 650-pound deadlift, 80-inch wingspan. Like just an insane, freaky testing times, freaky measurables. I think this is a kid that's got significant upside. And Nebraska offered last month, got him back on campus, and they did a really good job with him. He's building a good relationship with Donovan Raiola. He mentioned him and Coach Rule. He challenged Coach Rule challenged him to a arm wrestling competition, and he was like, "I'm going to spare Coach Rule this time, but maybe not next time." But those guys have gotten close. He's done a good job or the staff's done a good job making him feel like home. And this is one that I think Nebraska's going to have some longevity here because of proximity and also the relationships he's already built.
Yeah. And so, I asked him about his list after, because he had just come off a visit to Kansas State, and now, he went to Nebraska, and his list is like total no nonsense offensive line butt kickers, like Iowa, Nebraska, Iowa State, Wisconsin, Minnesota. He's not throwing in an Oregon or throwing in some schools that aren't going to recruit him. Like, this is a kid from South Dakota. Obviously, we're not going to see a ton of him unless he comes to our events or we see him at another event, but there aren't many lineman events to go to. And then, if he doesn't come to our events, it's hard to see him in person. I just don't know if we have the budget to go to Brandon, South Dakota for one player just to see him. Maybe at Inside Nebraska you do, because you got all the money, but he's a very impressive kid on film. He has those measurables, and then he's only looking at schools that like fit exactly who he is as a player. And so those, many of those programs have tons of offensive linemen in the NFL, and especially guys that like fit his style of play and his personality. So I think this is definitely a kid. Once we do 2026 rankings over the next few weeks, we'll definitely get a good ranking on him, and then probably only moves up from there the more we see him through his junior and senior years.
For sure. And that's one, like, I'm hoping to get out to see him in Brandon, just so at least someone from here, we have eyes on him and some video and photos of him
Yeah.
on the database. But yeah, that's one that is for at least us here at Inside Nebraska within driving distance and someone we can see.
Let's see. I'm doing it right now, Tim. It's only 3.5 hours.
Yeah, not bad at all.
For Nebraska, that's like down the road. Come on.
Yeah. Another regional offensive lineman that was also offered last month, Deacon Schmitt out of Windsor, Colorado. This one recruitment's a little more open. I even talked to him yesterday. He's only got like 6-7 offers right now, and he's like, it's pretty even right now for me. No one really standing out, but the fact Nebraska offered last month, and then again, he could have been anywhere this weekend and chose to come back to Nebraska, has a good relationship with Donovan Raiola, and this last visit gave him a chance to kind of see more of the facility, see more of like what the program has to offer overall, and just spend some time with the coaching staff, because the last time was a camp and he was just primarily just coached by Donovan Raiola. Got to see a little bit of what Raiola's like off the field as well.
Yeah. And Colorado, you get a lot of talent around the Denver suburbs. But then, what's happening now is you're getting a lot of O-line talent sort of outside of that. And so this is a big kid, 6'5", 290, from Windsor, Colorado, who's just really starting to get sort of into it. I do think Oklahoma might have a little bit of an edge here. They went to Colorado for Josh Bates a few years ago. Maybe there's some connection on a visit trip out there that they saw this kid too. They liked him a lot, but he's still very, very early in the process. I talked to him about the Nebraska visit this weekend, and he liked just like the Husker Olympics thing. Like, he's still in that sort of mode of just being around players. In Windsor, you're not around a lot of Division I players a lot. You're not having, every team in the country come by your school for 6 or 7 guys. So I think for him, it was just kind of getting that the meshing with the other recruits, the players, the coaches, that seems to be kind of his mentality right now in his recruitment. It's still very, very early. So he has a lot of time to dig down and sit in position meetings and get to know offensive line coaches better. Right now, it's sort of, hey, let's go to a big time program, get the feel for it, and see if I like it or not.
For sure. And the big thing I think with Schmitt and Parliament right now is like with some of the other names we've mentioned. Both have already scheduled return visits. Both are hoping to be back in town for the Colorado game September 7th. A lot of players are planning to be in town for that September 7th matchup. Schmitt notably was like, "Hey, I grew up kind of rooting for Colorado and Colorado State." He didn't watch college football much, so he wasn't aware of like the rivalry there, but those were the
Yeah.
teams he followed. He's like, but September 7th, I'm rooting for Nebraska, and I'll be there. So good for Nebraska getting him back in town, and that's another one again unranked right now, but I think he's going to see a steady rise up the rankings, as we get more eyes on him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and wanted to transition to just some of the more national names that were in town, guys on your in more in your ballpark, more in your side of the world, I guess. Brandon Arrington sandwiched a Nebraska visit in between trips to Oklahoma and Alabama. And haven't been able to catch up on the phone with him just yet. Been exchanging some texts with him, and he really enjoyed the visit. This was his first time getting out to Nebraska, and for him, I think the big thing was just seeing the facilities Nebraska has to offer, and I think it's a good thing the way it kind of the visits get scheduled out. He hasn't been on a lot of national campuses just yet. He's
Yeah.
primarily stuck around in the West Coast, but first time getting out to Oklahoma, first time getting to Nebraska and now Bama. Seeing Nebraska's facilities and Nebraska being able to be like, hey, we are up there with the best of the best from a facility standpoint now, and he gets to witness that before he even goes to Bama.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And so before the visit, I said, hey, are those the schools that are really sort of recruiting you pretty hard? And he said, yeah. And that's why I wanted to get out to all three. Arrington is much more and has been more, if there's a little bit of a criticism here, focused on track than football. So he hasn't done many, if any, football events this off season because he's been running track. He's like a legit super high end track kid. So, a lot of people have him ranked very, very high. I definitely want to see him this season to kind of gauge where exactly, the athleticism and the playmaking ability is not in question at all. But, running 100 yards unencumbered by people jamming you or hitting you or you having to cross or restart, all those things. I do want to see how he does that on a football field. But in terms of like a playmaker, like I've said before, Nebraska needs them. Oklahoma and Alabama can kind of get whoever they want. He is definitely that. So it's been very good for Nebraska to kind of target a kid like Arrington. He's going to have some serious competition, but it looks like those three, that's pretty good company to be in. Those three are the ones that are standing out most right now.
For sure. And yeah, no, Nebraska's hoping to get him back on campus in the fall. I think they're going to have that chance to do that. They got into this recruitment because of Tony White, defensive coordinator, who's
Yeah.
hails from that region, has a lot of familiarity with that region, specifically that part of California.
Yeah.
And because of White, they're in this. But I think him getting on campus, being able to build relationships with new defensive backs coach John Butler, Matt Rule, and some of the other guys on staff, regardless of what happens with White after this year, that's a guy that's on some hot lists. But
Yeah.
this is a guy that could potentially move on from Nebraska, get a head coaching job. If that happens, I think Nebraska still has some staying power now that they've got him around the rest of the staff, and he's been able to see kind of what the program has to offer as a whole, rather than just I like Nebraska solely because of my relationship with White.
Right. And like we've talked about before, I mean, Tony White is a phenomenal coach and, he stayed at Nebraska and kind of got a promotion and all those kinds of things. But there's no doubt that he's going to be on the list for head coaching opportunities that come open. So it's definitely going to be something to watch. You have a lot of time with Arrington, but, that's something that'll be figured out once the coaching carousel gets going again.
For sure. That's something we can't really speculate on right now, but figured I'd mention that. But yeah, I wanted to touch on a couple more California guys before we get out of here. Vance Spafford, 4-star wide receiver out of Mission Viejo, and Luke Fahey, also from Mission, both kind of snuck into Nebraska Saturday morning, somewhat unannounced. Vance was offered earlier this month by Jamar Mozee, and quickly made it into town for his first visit. Fahey's recruitment is kind of starting to pop a little bit. Nebraska hasn't offered just yet. I'm curious to see if that changes in the coming weeks now that they've seen him in person and had him on campus. You saw both these guys recently, Adam. Kind of what's your impression of both of them as players? And then, like, do you think Nebraska has a chance here with at least Spafford? Would they have an offer out to?
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting because I get the sense I just saw them at a Battle at the Beach 7-on-7 tournament, and I got the sense that they might want to play together. And there's so many times that, like, yeah, okay, that'll happen. But this is a quarterback receiver. At Mission Viejo is also a 4-star receiver, Philip Bell, and Spafford just had a far more, a far better connection with Fahey last year. He was like his go-to guy, even though Philip Bell was also on the field. So Spafford's a very special player. I just get the sense that Oregon is the team to beat for both of them right now, if not Oregon, Ole Miss. So, I think Spafford loves Junior Adams at Oregon. He coached Cooper Kupp in high school. There's some similarities in their game. And Fahey got that Oregon offer and really kind of started to fall in love with it. They were supposed to go to Oregon this weekend for Saturday Night Live, the camp up there. They ended up not going. And then they were supposed to, they ended up at Nebraska, and then from Nebraska go out there. And then something happened with their flights out of Omaha. I don't want to say it was CrowdStrike or subterfuge by anybody at the Omaha airport, but it was definitely a strange situation because they had planned to be they both have all week long had planned to be at Oregon and then ended up only going to Nebraska. So that definitely helps then. But I think both would probably be a long shot right now.
For sure. Yeah, but again, kind of, I think getting on campus, like we've said, kind of setting that
Huge.
table
Yeah.
kind of setting that for, hey, we want to make an impression on you in the fall with our play, and we're not gonna like, there's nothing we can do to pitch you right now, but we just
Right.
want to let our play do the talking.
Right.
Before we get out of here, just a couple more to touch on some of the top regional guys or top in-state guys that were in town. 2026 tight end Isaac Jensen was back in town. I still like Nebraska here. Ultimately, I think he's going a little slower with the process than I thought. I caught up with him just on his timeline to figure out kind of what he's thinking. He hopes this fall is going to be big for him. There's going to be a lot of eyes on Millard South with Chase Lofton there and that offense. Marion Jackson's there. That's another top 26 weapon. And then you've got Deshaun Prince, a 3-star wide receiver that transferred in. So a lot of eyes are going to be on Millard South, and Jensen's hoping, he sees some national offers. I think seeing the way Lofton handled his process and how Lofton's process changed once he got some national offers, I think Jensen's hoping for that same thing. But early on, I do like where Nebraska stands with the in-state tight end, 6'6". He said he's up to 220 now, so been putting on weight, good weight, and a guy that can stretch the field for you, kind of fits what Nebraska's looking for at that tight end position. And 26 is a big year for them to address that position. And
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think, they're going to see this year how they use those guys. There's talented tight ends on the team. There's no doubt about that. So I think Jensen kind of fits that profile from a physical kind of situation. He's, also a basketball player, an athletic kid. He told me after the visit yesterday that what stood out was the effort that the staff is building, relationships with his family and stuff. So he loved the facilities, he loved the tours and all the activities and stuff. But what really stood out to him was the staff making it clear that he's a top priority, bringing him and his family in for a visit. And so this does sort of feel like a matter of time until things get done. And especially for these local kids that are very, very talented, Nebraska probably closes.
For sure. And I'd say the same thing about Elkhorn North linebacker Jase Reynolds. He got offered last month. Admittedly grew up a Husker fan and was very excited by the offer. To date, Nebraska's still the only Power 4 offer he has. I think he sees a couple more offers come in this fall once he puts some more on tape. But I feel Nebraska's gonna end up winning out there down the line. I feel the exact same way about 2027 offensive tackle Matt Erickson, 6'8", 280 pounds, is yet to play a snap of varsity ball, but he's excited to do that this fall. And Nebraska's in there early, and Nebraska's hoping that helps them out. He's a legacy, of course, and so Nebraska's hoping that helps them out as well with a guy that they project is going to be probably the top player in state in 2027, if not one of the top. That 27 in-state class is looking pretty good. And yeah, Adam, any final thoughts before we get you out of here? Just anything from the weekend that stood out to you? Any final thoughts on Nebraska's big weekend?
Yeah, I think, there were big weekends all across the country in certain spots. But what stood out to me, especially for Nebraska, is they didn't bring in 100 guys. They didn't bring in, guys that they couldn't get, that they didn't have a shot at, and then tried to flip. And a guy like Arrington has him in his top three. Harris, they might lead for him. They had, a lot of guys in town who fit their style of play, that they can really get some local kids, some regional kids, and then some national, I don't want to say long shots, but guys that, really fit it. So I think that is the right number. When a lot of times when I talk to kids and there were 100 kids on a visit, you're like, damn, whatever school can get everybody there. But then they get no personal attention. That's what kids want. It's just sort of like a meat market situation a lot of times. That's what kids don't want. And so I think Nebraska's coaching staff, recruiting staff is really working well together to target realistic guys that fit their system and can continue to improve the program. This is not going to be an overnight fix. There's going to be some portal work that needs to be done to address issues that need to be fixed immediately. But when you're recruiting from high school out, it's going to take a while. But a lot of the guys that were on campus this weekend, the final weekend of visits, thank God, the summer is probably wrapping up now. So we have a couple week break before the season starts. Were guys that a lot of them could end up in Nebraska recruiting classes.
For sure. And yeah, I think a lot of this weekend was about setting that table initially. And like you said, I think the work begins now and just proving yourself on the field and then turning these early relationships you've built into positive commitments down the line. Yeah, and Adam, we appreciate you joining the show. Hope you have you on again in the future. From us, I think in general, I think, hope we get a little bit of downtime as a collective group of analysts, these next couple of weeks before the season kicks off.
Yeah, rankings start 6 a.m. Monday morning. Let's go.
All right, man. We appreciate you a ton. And yeah, let's get you out of here.
All right. See you, Tim.